Hi there, world. It's Mo, and I'm back again this week. A little bit later than usual. Apologies for that. A lot has been happening. But I am back for my official read-through of Heaven Official Blessings, chapter 8 through 10. And I have been afraid of these chapters because they are long and monstrous and just... It's one thing when you're reading it. It's another thing when you're reading it out loud. It takes a lot of energy that I never thought of preemptively when deciding to read the first 10 chapters. But I am back. No more delay. Again, I will be reading from, and I never know whether or not to mention these translators because I know some of them don't want people looking for them, but I think she got official permission, so I'm gonna say her name, Saculations. So she's an official translator of Heaven's Official's Blessings. If you guys want to check that out, that's what I'm gonna be reading from. Before I jump into chapter 8 though, there was some Mojang Function news yesterday came out. Late into the night, Tuesday, which was that Heaven Official's Blessing is going to be turned into a live action movie, series, TV show. Now, if you have been listening to my podcast, you know the doctor and I covered The Untamed because we loved it and it was amazing and it was everything. But we also realized what it was for its flaws, but one of the biggest things about it was the actors were charming, and even though everything wasn't 100%, you could tell everyone in here cared about this production. So, whatever. Untamed was great, but it also ran into some hurdles because it is a BL novel. It's based on a BL novel, and if you know, in China, the government is allowed to censor for anything they think is inappropriate to be shown on television or in media or in daily life. So whether it's too much kissing or if you watch a lot of dramas with divorcees and they're never happy or women basically if the criminals never get away, that's a good example. So it's shows like that will get censored, or they'll say, well, you have to change your ending. We're not going to have a criminal win. Ocean's 11. No, that's Ocean's 11 created by China would have been yeah, all go to jail at the end. So there's also the censorship aspect. One of my favorite BLs, Addicted, the main stars were banned from ever meeting in public again, together. Johnny Wang and Timmy Xu. Now they're both male lead actors. Now they've transitioned to heteronormative romantic comedies. But in my head, Timmy Xu is always a bottom. It is what it is. Where was I? Tangent. Okay, yeah, those two actors were banned by China from ever appearing again in public because, undue influence, the whole LGBTQ issue that is still ongoing in China. So, the communities that like shows like this try not to have it blow up because things then happen. There was the whole AO3 incident that happened this past summer that almost got Xiao and Wang Yibo. Basically, Xiao Zhan couldn't say shit on the internet for a couple of months because of some fan fiction nonsense that was linked to them as inspirations. It was a shit show. So again, I'm giving you guys all this background to say why a lot of people are, on the one hand, super excited for this because anything Mojang Dangshu is very much so welcome. But, taking a sip of my tea. But at the same time, you have to realize the context of what that looks like. It's almost like you're, And then people were like, oh, this actor could do it, this, that. Like, people were naming established actors. And I don't see an established actor wanting to take the risk of censorship when it comes to, like, a BL. And also, like, what that ends up becoming is a bromance. Such as, like, so they'll take a BL, which, again, if you don't know what a BL is like a boy love novel. And they'll take that and they'll strip away the romance in there. So it's just like two bros who are really affectionate, which causes confusion anyway. But it just sort of takes the essence of the works out. So there's also the fear of that, because in order for that work to be published, you have to take all of the questionable parts. And The Untamed just happened to The Untamed just managed to like actually pass production, and like there was a lot of staring looks. So a lot of people were surprised that got made. But yeah, I wouldn't want established actors playing this, because that's sort of the fun of a new show like this, of a new concept like this. It's not going to someone established. And I hope they continue that. And it's basically to say, like, yeah, someone who is not established is more willing to take risks, because they are like, oh, this will give me worldwide international fame, even though it might come at the wagging hands of like censorship bros. Okay, maybe they're more willing to take the risk. Once you start getting that check, you're not quite willing to take that risk. But okay, so a live action drama of天官赐福. Apologies for my pronunciation. Supposedly pretty much confirmed to begin filming in the second half of 2021. I'm assuming, like, once COVID is under control. I had noticed, if you listen to the last podcast I did on Chinese dramas, Please Love Me, the director for that show directed The Untamed, and that's also going to be the same director that directs Heaven Official's Blessing. So it's not a question of getting a good cast. I don't know. It's like a lot of things has to go together, like a good cast, chemistry, plot, silliness. Like, you guys have heard me read this book, and again, like I said, reading isn't exhausting. Like, I don't know how much money they're gonna have to make this world. But yeah, no, it's gonna become a movie, live action. It's co-produced by Aichi, and Horace Carton, and syndicated film. So, I thought the director's name was Chen Kelam, but it seems the internet is saying it's Chen Jialin. So fuck you, my drama list. Sometimes they just put like random names there for some reason. But yeah, so that was the announcement I wanted to make before I jumped into chapter 8 of Heaven Official's Blessing. So here we go. Chapter 8. The Ghost Holds a Wedding. The Crown Prince climbs onto the marriage sedan. This chapter is approximately the end of episode 2, beginning of episode 3 of the Dangua. Should he reach over or not? Xiang remained calm and collected. After all, he hadn't finished thinking things through yet. Should he continue acting mighty and unmovable despite encountering hardships? Or should he pretend to be a new bride who was currently scared out of her wits? One who would cowardly move backwards in an attempt to hide. The owner of that hand was quite patient and elegant. Xiang didn't move, so that hand didn't move either, as if the hand's owner was waiting for his reply. After quite a while, as if he had been possessed by a demon, Xiang actually reached out his hand. He stood up and was about to push aside the curtain, blocking the door so he could step off the sedan. However, the person outside was already a step ahead of him and had already raised the red curtain. The person who came held Xiang's hands, though he didn't grasp it too tightly, as if he were afraid he would accidentally hurt him. This resulted in creating the illusion that the person was quite cautious and careful. Xiang's head was lowered, He allowed the other person to lead him before slowly leaving the sedan. When he looked down, he glimpsed a pile of wolf and bay slave corpses by his feet. They looked as if they had been strangled to death by the silk cloth reed. Xiang's thoughts took a slight turn before he stumbled slightly. With a startled gasp, he began to fall forward. And this in the Donghua, he just falls into Xiang's chest. The person who came immediately placed his hand onto Xiang's back to support him. Thus, he managed to catch him before he fell. Since he supported him, Xiang took the opportunity to easily grab his wrist. However, he only felt something cold and hard. It turned out that the person who had come wore a pair of silver fan braces. These fan braces were gorgeous and exquisite. I'm gonna assume they're like bracelets. They were ancient patterns decorating them. Maple leaves, butterflies, and sinister ferocious beasts were also engraved onto them. They looked quite mysterious, unlike something from the Central Plains. Rather, it looked as if they were an antique from a minor exotic tribe. They perfectly enclosed this person's wrist, making him appear refined and agile. Ice cold silver, deathly pale hands. They seemed lifeless. However, they also seemed to contain a murderous spirit and evil intentions. That's a lot, my guy. That is a lot. And that's one of my favorite things about Xiang. Even when he's smiling, tripping, whatever, his mind is always working. Xiang had faked that fall of his. Sure you did, boo. Intending to fill the other person out. Even now, Rui was still hidden in his wide sleeves as it slowly twisted around his wrist, waiting for the moment to pounce. However, the person who came only held his hands once more before leading him forward. On one hand, Xiang's hand was still covered with that veil, so he couldn't see clearly. On the other hand, he wanted to stall for time. Sure you do, boo. This was why Xiang deliberately walked very slowly. However, unexpectedly, the other person actually cooperated with his pace and walked extremely slowly as well. Every now and then, this person's other hand would support him and pull him along, as if he was afraid Xiang would fall again. Now, if you're not watching the animation, this is basically Xiang dressed up as a bride in all red, in a red caravan, or whatever color the caravan is, and Xiang basically meets him in a groom's outfit, and is escorting him, which is something the groom does as his bride, and Xiang is all nothing to see here. He is quite adorable. Okay, let's see, where are we? Although Xiang was extremely vigilant and on guard, when he saw how the other person treated him, he couldn't help but think, if this person really was a bridegroom, he was truly being gentle and considerate to the extreme. At this time, Xiang suddenly heard an extremely clear tinkling noise. Every time the two of them took a step, that clear noise would ring once. Just when he was pondering over what this noise was, the suppressed roars of wild beasts erupted from all directions. Wild wolves. Xiang's figure moved slightly as the ring on his wrist suddenly tightened. Who knew before he could do anything, the person holding his hand lightly patted his hands twice, as if comforting him and telling him not to worry. These two pats were light enough to be considered as an extremely gentle move. Xiang was slightly startled before he realized that those roars were already disappearing. When he tried to carefully listen again, Xiang suddenly discovered that these wolves weren't roaring or snarling. Instead, they were whimpering. These noises were clearly the sound a wild beast made when they were frightened to the extreme. They were whimpering. They were the whimpering the beast made when they were unable to take a single step. The sobs during their final struggle before death. Xiang's curiosity concerning the person became even stronger. At this moment, he only wanted to take off his veil and take a look at him before doing anything else. However, he knew that this action was not something proper. Thus, Xiang could only peek through the small crack in the veil before trying to piece together an image, despite missing the big picture. With this glimpse, Xiang saw the hem of a red robe, and under that red robe was a pair of black leather boots. They were currently walking at a leisurely pace. This person's pace was a bit careless, mixed with a light brisk bounce in his step. It made him appear like a lively teenager. However, he walked as if he had a goal or destination firmly in mind, making it so it seemed like no one could stop him. Whoever dared to block his path would only be crushed into dust. This rather made Xiang unable to precisely determine what kind of person this man was. While he was turning over guesses in his mind, a white and ghastly thing suddenly appeared in his view. That was a skull. Xiang's pace stagnated for a moment. With only a single glance, Xiang was able to tell that there was something wrong with the position of the skull. This was clearly the corner of some sort of spiritual array. If one touched it, Xiang was afraid that the whole array would launch an attack at some point. However, with this teenager's current pace, it seemed like he hadn't noticed something was there. Xiang was just pondering over whether he should give the teenager a warning when he heard a ka-cha noise. With this tragic crunching noise, Xiang blankly watched that person's footstep onto the skull and shatter it into dust. Then, as if he hadn't felt or noticed anything, this person indifferently stepped on the skull dust and kept on walking. This guy actually, just with a single step, crushed the entire array into useless dust. What he's basically saying is there's probably some kind of diagram on the floor, some kind of spell and shit. And you can't just be doing shit like that without like it ricocheting back at you. And Xiang did. And ain't shit happened. Because he's motherfucking Xiang. At this moment, the teenager's pace suddenly paused. Xiang's heart moved, thinking it was because the other boy was about to do something. However, that teenager only stopped for a second before he continued to lead him forward. After 2 steps, some soft thudding noises echoed from above their head, like the sound of rain hitting an umbrella. It turned out that a moment ago, the teenager had opened an umbrella before holding it above their heads. Aww. Although it wasn't the time to think this, Xiang couldn't help but praise the teenager for being so thoughtful. However, this was rather odd. Was it raining? Within the quiet and dark mountains, within the forest filled with thick weeds, in the distant depths of the mountain range, a group of wild wolves faced the moon and howled. Xiang didn't know if it was because a slaughtering fest had just occurred, but within the cold air, the light scent of blood slowly emerged. This situation and this scenery were both demonically alluring. However, this teenager held his hand with one hand and held up an umbrella with the other as he slowly led him forward. For no reason at all, this made their stroll seem romantic and flirtatious, like they were sincerely in love, inseparable. Oh, boo. That bizarre bout of rain came in a strange manner and left in a strange manner as well. It didn't take long before the sounds of raindrops hitting the umbrella disappeared. So all this time, he's still covered with this veil. Like, Xiang is ridiculous. He's like, I can't let him know I'm not a bride. Let's see where this is going. And like, dude is like slowly and gently leaving. And also dressed in red again. And like takes out an umbrella. Like I understand. Reality, you'd be like, who am I? Right? Who am I? That's how he thinks of himself. It seemed like he had put away his umbrella. Simultaneously, he finally let go of Xiang's hand before walking a step closer to him. The hand that had held his and led him all the way here lightly touched his veil before slowly lifting it up. Xiang had been waiting for this moment for their whole walk here. He didn't move at all as he watched the lingering red curtain in front of his eyes slowly disappear. The silk cloth moved. It wasn't because this teenager had revealed any killing intent. Rather, Xiang intended to take the initiative and attack first. They could only have a nice chat after the other person was unable to move. Who would have thought that after the silk cloth flew out, it brought along a burst of harsh wind? The scarlet veil lifted the teenager's hand, flying up before falling once more. Xiang only had the time to see the after image of a teenager dressed in red before Rui rushed over. Unexpected, that teenager suddenly shattered into 1,000 silver butterflies. They scattered into a burst of silvery light, looking like a glistening and dazzling stellar wind. Although this really wasn't the time or place, Xiang couldn't help but marvel at the scene after he retreated 2 steps. The sight really was too gorgeous, as if it was a fantasy scene only seen in one's dreams. At this moment, a silver butterfly began to leisurely fly in front of him. Xiang didn't manage to carefully examine it before the butterfly flew around him twice. Flew around him. So after that, it integrated itself back into the glistening wind, transforming into a part of the silvery light, filling the sky. With the flap of their wings, the butterflies flew upward. After quite a while, Xiang finally snapped himself out of his daze. In his heart, he mentally wondered. In the end, was this teenager the ghost bridegroom or not? Because it's like, if he wasn't, what the fuck? Yeah, Xiang, that's literally the question at hand. In his opinion, he kept feeling as though this teenager wasn't. If he was the ghost bridegroom, then the wild wolves in Mount Yujin had to have been his subordinates. But if that was the case, why would those wolves be that scared when they saw him? In addition, that spiritual array they saw on the road here should have been one that had been set up by the ghost bridegroom. However, that teenager just casually crushed the array into rubbish. On the other hand, if that teenager wasn't the bridegroom, why would he come to rob the sedan of its bride? The more Xiang thought, the more strange he thought this situation was. Xiang threw the silk cloth wreath on his shoulders as he mentally thought, let's forget about it. There's also the probability that he had been someone who had been coincidentally passing by. For now, let's put him to the side. The reason for why I'm here is what's more important. Xiang took a look around before letting out a surprised sound. It turned out that in the distance there was actually a building. It looked quite heavy and grounded as it stood there. Since the teenager brought him here, and since this building had been painstakingly hidden in this befuddling array, it became imperative for Xiang to go in and take a look. Duh. Xiang took a few... Xiang, law and order. Xiang took a few steps before he suddenly stopped. He thought for a moment before going back and picking up the wedding veil that was on the floor. Baby. Patting the dust off of it, he held it in his hand before walking toward the building again. Boo, you're married. It's done. This building's red walls look quite tall, with bricks that look conspicuously modeled. It actually looked similar to an old temple for the god of the city. In addition, based on Xiang's experience, the structure of this building made it probable that it was a martial god's temple. Sure enough, Xiang raised his head and saw 3 big words engraved in the metal on the top of the front door. The words said, Mingguan Temple. The martial god of the north, General Mingguan. He was precisely the god Ling Guan had mentioned last time in the spiritual communication array. The General Pei whose incense sticks burned prosperously in the north. Oh, I need tea. Okay, that was becoming a problem. Okay, here we go. No wonder they hadn't found the Mingguan temple in the vicinity and found a Nangyan shrine instead. It turned out that the Mingguan temple in this area was within Mount Yujun. However, this temple had long been sealed off by a befuddling array. Could it be perhaps there was some connection between the ghost bridegroom and General Mingguan? However, towards this General Mingguan, one could say he was someone proud of his success and arrogant in his power. Okay. In addition, his position in the north was also very stable. Xiang personally didn't believe that this kind of martial god would be willing to be involved with such a vicious thing like the ghost bridegroom. On the other hand, something like unluckily allowing a vicious thing occupy their place when they weren't aware of anything wasn't something strange. As for what the truth behind everything was, it was better to make one's conclusions after looking things through more. Xiang walked over. The temple door was closed, but it hadn't been locked. Thus, it opened after a single push. Thus is like one of my favorite words in life. Like, I just really enjoy it as a word. Like, it's a great transition word. After he opened the door, a strange odor assaulted his senses. It wasn't the smell of dust found in a place that hadn't been uninhabited for a long time. No, it was a faint, rotten stench. Xiang walked in and closed the front door, making it seem as though no one had entered the temple in the first place. In the center of the main hall, a godly statue was located on the altar for offerings. Naturally, this godly statue depicted that martial god from the north, General Mingguan. Many humanoid objects, for example, sculptures, puppets, and portraits, were all things that were easily infected by evil influences. Therefore, the very first thing Xiang did was walk forward and carefully examine this godly statue. After taking a long look, Xiang's conclusion was, this godly statue was modeled very superbly. It held a double-edged sword as it wore a belt made out of jade on its waist. In addition, it had a handsome face and looked imposing and impressive. There was no problem with this godly statue. Moreover, that rotten odor wasn't coming from this statue either. Thus, Xiang stopped caring about it and turned around. He decided to head to the back of the main hall to take a look, whatever that word is. However, the moment Xiang turned around, he froze in his place as his pupil shrunk. A group of women wearing crimson wedding dresses and covered with veils stood stiffly in front of him. In addition, that faint rotten odor was drifting over from the bodies of these women. Xiang quickly calmed down before counting those women. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted all the way to 17. They were really the 17 brides who had gone missing in the Mount Yujun region. You remember why we're here? 17 brides over 100 years have gone missing. And the rich folks just basically started bombarding the god cloud and was like, you need to take care of this shit. So they sent Xiang down. That's the mystery. So he's found the 17 brides. They are dead. They are rotting corpse. Again, this is over like 17 brides over a 100-year period. The red color in some of those brides' dresses looked a bit faded, and the clothes themselves looked ragged and old. These brides ought to have been the ones who had gone missing first. On the other hand, some of the brides' wedding dresses looked brand new. The style of the dresses was also currently popular as well. In addition, the smell of a rotten corpse that came from these brides was also quite light. These brides ought to have been the ones who had gone missing recently. Xiang thought for a moment before uncovering the veils of one of the brides. The face revealed under the scarlet veil was extremely pale. The skin tone was so white, it looked a bit green. Lit by the dim moonlight, she looked terribly frightening. The scariest thing about her, however, was that although this woman's muscles had twisted after death, on that twisted face she still wore a rigid smile. Xiang took off the veil of the girl beside her. Once again, this girl's mouth was curved up in the same smile. In fact, all of the dead people in this room wore garments while smiling even in death. Beside his ear, Xiang seemingly began hearing that child's voice as they sang that strange song. New bride, new bride, new... I wish I knew how this went. New bride on the marriage sedan, eyes brimming with tears, passing the mountain's mound. Under the veil, do not hold a rising smile. Suddenly, he heard a strange noise that seemed to originate from outside the temple. It was truly a strange sound. It was so strange. It was hard to describe what it sounded like. In fact, it sounded kind of like two sticks drumming the floor while rolled up in thick fabric. It also sounded like there was something heavy attached to the moving thing. So they were dragging it across the floor with difficulty. The noise started off from far away but moved extremely quickly. In a flash, it sounded like it was outside the temple's front door. With a long creak, the door of the temple was pushed open. Regardless, whether it was a person who came or some other kind of thing, it was most likely the ghost bridegroom. And right now, it had already returned home. Ghost bridegroom? There was no exit at the end of the main hall, and there was also nowhere for him to hide. Xiang only thought for a moment before he saw the bride standing beside him. Immediately he covered his head with his wedding veil again, before standing within the group of brides, becoming silent and motionless. If there were only 3 to 6 bodies here, then of course it would be easy for others to notice something wrong with a single glance. However, right now there were 17 corpses here. Unless someone counted them one by one like Xiang did, it would be very hard for them to immediately realize that someone was hiding here. He had just placed himself in the crowd of brides when he heard something clomp their way into the room. As Xiang stood there motionlessly, he began pondering over what this sound was. In the end, what was this? With the pauses between each noise, it kind of sounds like a person's footsteps. However, what kind of thing would have this kind of footstep? This definitely wasn't the teenager who had brought me here. That guy walked in a very unhurried and pleasant manner, and the jingling sound of bells accompanied his steps. Still got somebody else on your mind, I see, even while you are in a dangerous situation, my good sir. Suddenly, Xiang thought of something. His heart immediately tightened. This was bad. The height was wrong. After all of these corpses were bodies of women. But he was a genuine man. He was naturally much taller than these corpses. He's like 6 feet tall. Although nobody could tell there was an additional person in this crowd at first glance, it would be easy for them to notice there was someone who looked particularly tall. But after thinking things over a bit more, Xiang immediately calmed down. He was indeed quite tall. However, that young lady, little Ying, only combed his hair into a simple hairstyle. She didn't do much with it. On the other hand, these brides were all dressed up. Their hair was combed up so high those strands were practically soaring to the sky. In addition, thanks to the phoenix crowns they wore, the top of their heads became a huge chunk taller. If they added everything together, some of these brides probably wouldn't be shorter than him. Even if he was tall, it wouldn't be too eye-catching. Like, I love Mojang Dongxu, but yo, she literally... I feel like another author would be like, he thought about this, he made a decision, moved on, and she was like, no, we're gonna walk through this thought process together. Just as he was thinking that, Xiang once again heard the clopping noise from before. This time it sounded like it was only 2 zhang away. After a moment, he heard the clopping noise again. It sounded like it was even closer to him now. Xiang finally realized what this ghost bridegroom was doing. It was lifting every bride's veil as it checked the faces of the corpse one by one. If he didn't make a move now, when would have been a better time? The silk cloth Rui flew out before slamming into the ghost bridegroom. Then he heard a loud noise before a black fog began filling up the room. Xiang didn't know whether this fog was poisonous or not. Since he didn't have any spiritual energy protecting his body, he immediately stopped breathing as he covered his nose and mouth with his hand. At the same time, he urged the silk cloth Rui to dance and create wind in an attempt to quickly disperse the fog. Suddenly, he heard the clopping noises again. Xiang squinted before he saw a short and small lump pass through the temple's front door. With the temple's door wide open, a lump of black fog began rolling out as it headed towards the forest. Xiang made a prompt decision before he immediately chased after it. Unexpectedly, he hadn't taken many steps outside when within the forest, a blaze of fire soared into the sky. Distantly, a group of yells filled with killer intent drifted over. "Let's go!" A younger's voice sounded especially resonant. "Catch the ugly creature and help our people get rid of an evil. Catch the ugly creature and help our people get rid of an evil. As for the reward, we can divide it evenly among us." This was precisely that young leader Xiang began complaining in his heart. This group of people had said before that they were going to search the mountain. Unexpectedly, they actually came. Originally, it would have been fine since there was that befuddling array covering everything up. However, that array had already been destroyed by that teenager. These blind cats actually encountered a dead mouse. Thus, they actually found the ghost bridegroom. Xiang took another look. The direction those people had been in seemed to coincidentally be the direction the ghost bridegroom had been escaping to. Xiang grabbed the silk cloth Rui and rushed over there. He began shouting, "Stand there and don't move!" That was horrible shouting. Acting on my end. I acknowledge it. Everyone there paused a bit from surprise. Xiang wanted to continue talking when the youngster began to fervently ask, "Young lady, you were captured by the ghost bridegroom and forced onto Mount Yujin, right? What's your name? We came here to save you. You can be at ease now." These motherfuckers. Okay. Xiang was startled for a moment by those ridiculous words. Then he finally remembered he was wearing a girl's wedding dress. There hadn't been a mirror in the Nangyang temple, so he didn't know what his current appearance was. However, based on this reaction, that young lady, little Ying, was pretty good at what she did. This was because after these people were surprised, they started treating him as a real bride. Moreover, this youngster was probably hoping that he was the 17 bride, so it would be easier for him to take the reward. Why would it be easier? God, this guy's so sketchy. Sketchy. And stupid, as you guys will now see. Let me say scrolled away. December 2020. Are you guys excited for December 21st? It's supposed to be something happening like the stars. We're supposed to see it clearly. Should be fun, December 21st. Look into the sky and hopefully it's not our alien overlords. No matter what, however, he couldn't allow these villagers to run all over the place under these circumstances. But he also couldn't guarantee that the ghost bridegroom wasn't still running away. Luckily, at this moment, 2 black-cloth teenagers finally managed to rush over. Seeing this, Xiang immediately yelled, "Nanyang, Fuyao, quickly, come over here and help me." Unfortunately, after these 2 small martial gods looked over, by following the sound, they both began staring blankly at him. Then they simultaneously backed away 2 steps. Xiang had to call them a few more times before they finally reacted. Seeing this, Xiang asked, "You guys came from over there, right? Did you encounter something on the way here?" Nanfeng replied, "We didn't." Hearing that, Xiang said, "That's good. Fuyao, go down this path and do a search. Look around in all directions and make sure the ghost bridegroom hasn't escaped." After Fuyao heard this, he immediately turned around and left. Xiang continued speaking. "Nanfeng, guard this place and make sure not a single person can leave. If Fuyao can't find the ghost bridegroom in the mountains, then the ghost bridegroom must be hidden among this group of people." Ooh. When they heard this, all of the burly men were stunned. That youngster already realized he wasn't a woman, and thus was the first that jumped up. "Nobody can leave? Why should we listen to you? Are there no laws in this land? Everyone, don't listen to them." The youngster hadn't even properly stood up when Nanfeng thrust out his palm. Suddenly, a tall tree with a thick trunk snapped in half and fell to the ground. Everyone there immediately remembered that this teenager would strike things before completing a full sentence. If they were chopped in half like the pillar he had broken before, then even paying the money would lose any meaning. Thus everyone shut up. That younger spoke up again. "You say the ghost bridegroom is within this group, so he has to be in this group? Everyone here has a first name and a last name. If you don't believe me, come over here and use the firelight to check our faces. Check us one by one." Xiang said, "Nanfeng." Nanfeng took the youngster's torch. I don't even know why they're calling him youngster. He's a fucking hooligan who don't listen. Nanfeng took the youngster's torch and began checking people one by one. Everyone's brows were beaded with sweat. Some people looked tense, some people looked at a loss. Some seemed excited, some were lively. Xiang couldn't see the cause. Thus he walked to the front of the group and said, "Everyone, please excuse my previous offense. However, I wounded that ghost bridegroom and it escaped. But it definitely couldn't have gone far. These 2 young friends of mine didn't encounter him on the road when they came here. So I'm afraid it might have hidden itself in this group of people. I'll have to trouble everyone to take a closer look at one another. Clearly check everyone's faces and make sure there isn't anyone you don't know here." When they heard that the ghost bridegroom was probably within their group, everyone immediately felt their blood run cold. They didn't dare to be careless as they started staring at each other in dismay. Next, they began playing the "you look at me, I'll look at you" game. After they stared at each other for quite a while, suddenly someone yelled in a strange tone, "How come you're here?" Shylan's heart skipped a beat as he rushed over and asked, "Who is it?" The youngster snatched someone else's torch before lighting it up in a corner. He yelled, "This ugly girl." The person he was pointing at was actually Little Ying. Under the light, Little Ying's face with her crooked nose and slanted eyes appeared a bit twisted, as if she couldn't stand being exposed so prominently. She raised a hand to block her face from everyone's view. Then she began speaking. I just couldn't feel at ease, so I decided to come and take a look. Seeing how she was convulsing with fear, Xiang took away the torch in that youngster's hand before asking the crowd, "How was it?" Everyone started shaking their heads. "There's no one we don't recognize. We've seen everyone here before." Nanfang asked, "Could it have attached itself to someone's body?" Xiang thought for a moment before replying. That would be unlikely. The thing had been solid. Nanfang reminded him, "However, that thing is already of the right rank. It's hard to say whether or not it could change its form." While the two of them were hesitating over here, the youngster was the first to start shouting, "The ghost bridegroom isn't one of us. You saw it clearly as well, right? If you saw it clearly, then let us go." Scattered voices began echoing his words. Gotta love mob mentality. Xiang swept his gaze over them before saying, "Everyone, please stay in front of the Mingguan temple. Do not leave." Everyone wanted to complain, however. When they saw Nanfang's grave and stern expression, no one dared to. At this moment, Fu Yao returned and reported, "It's not in the vicinity." Hearing that, Xiang stared at the dense crowd in front of the Mingguan temple. Then he began to slowly declare, "In that case, the ghost bridegroom must be within this crowd." Oh my god, chapter 8 was forever. Let me scroll down. Oh my god, guys. Okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna just be pausing a lot and drinking a lot of tea. Jesus Christ, what did I get myself into? Okay, let's keep on trucking. Chapter 9. The Mountains Locked Ancient Temple. The Forest of Hanging Corpse. Interesting titles. Fu Yao noticed that Little Ying was hiding within the crowd of people. Frowning, he asked, "Why is there a woman here?" Just miserable son of a bitch. Although his tone wasn't aggressive, it didn't contain any goodwill either. Thus, when Little Ying heard it, she bowed her head. Xiang was the one who replied for her and said, "She was afraid we'll meet a mishap, so she came here to take a look." Fu Yao turned to ask the bystanders another question. "Did you guys come up here with her?" At first, the people in the crowd hesitated a bit before they replied. "I don't remember anymore. It's hard to say." "That's wrong. When we came up, she wasn't with us, right?" "In any case, I didn't see her. I didn't see her either." Little Ying hastily spoke up. "It's because I secretly followed you guys." The youngster immediately asked, "Why did you secretly follow us? Do you have a guilty conscience? Perhaps you're the disguised ghost bridegroom?" Leaps this one. The moment he said this, the people standing around Little Ying abruptly fled, creating a vast and empty space. Little Ying began waving her hands in a flustered manner before she said, No, I'm Little Ying. I'm really her." Then she turned toward Xiang and said, "Young lord, we just met each other. I helped you put on makeup and helped you dress and groom yourself." When they heard this, everyone began to look over to stare at him. There were even some people who started to whisper things in bits and pieces. Xiang heard phrases like kink, different from ordinary people. "I can't believe it." Coughing twice, Xiang explained, "This is just a requirement of the mission. A requirement of the mission. Ningfeng, Fu Yao, you guys. It was only after he turned his head did Xiaolin become aware that Nanfeng and Fu Yao were staring at him in a strange manner. In addition, they began slowly moving away from him in a restrained way. Being stared at with gazes like that made Xiaolin feel goosebumps all over his body. He asked them, "Do you guys have something you want to say?" How could Xiaolin have known that a girl's skill in makeup created legendary and mystifying results? Little Ying had only taught him how to fix his eyebrows by drawing them elegantly, how to powder his face with some white powder, and how to dot his lips with deep red rouge. However, if he didn't speak, Xiaolin looked exactly like a gentle, soft, and beautiful young lady. Thus, when those two looked at him, it made their hearts shake tremendously. They found this scene hard to believe. It made them feel uneasy from head to toe as they began to doubt life itself. Xiaolin's face still looked like his face, but both Fu Yao and Nanfeng felt as if they didn't know who they were talking to when they faced his current appearance. Nanfeng immediately shook his head. "I don't have anything I want to say." Xiaolin replied, "Perhaps it's better if you guys said something." At this time, people in the crowd began speaking up. Hey, this is a Mingguang temple. This mountain's forest actually had a Mingguang temple. Odd. I've never seen it before. One after another, everyone began looking at the strange sight. However, Xiaolin suddenly said, "Yes, it's a Mingguang temple." Nanfeng noticed that his tone was a bit odd. He asked, "What's wrong?" Xiaolin replied, "The north is clearly General Mingguang's territory. It isn't as if the incense burning for him wasn't flourishing, and it's not like his spiritual power is weak. However, why is there only a Nanyang temple under Mount Yujun?" It was rather easy to understand why that official would send his prayers to the martial god, Heavenly Emperor. Oh, that's some good tea. Okay. After all, he had been the #1 martial god for the last millennium, and his status far exceeded General Mingguang's. Naturally, the higher and more influential you went, the more insured and secured one would be. However, General Mingguang's position was equal to General Nanyang's position, and there was hardly any difference between the two of them. If you really had to differentiate them, then General Mingguang had 9,000 temples, 1,000 more than General Nanyang. Xiaolin really couldn't understand why General Mingguang would give up something close and instead seek something far away. He continued speaking and said, "Normally, even if the Mingguang temple on Mount Yujun is taken over by the ghost bridegroom, resulting in other people being unable to find it, one could always just build another Mingguang temple somewhere else. However, for what reason would another martial god's temple be built here?" Fu Yao immediately understood and said, There has to be another reason, no duh, Sherlock. Yes, there has to be another reason that would make the people of Mount Yujun region stop building Mingguang temples. You guys, please lend me some spiritual energy again. I'm afraid I'll have to go ask. At that moment, someone suddenly shouted, "So many brides, When he realized that the voice had come from within the temple, Xiaolin immediately turned around. He had told these people to properly stay on the open space outside the temple, but they actually turned a deaf ear to his instructions and ran inside. Because they are stupid. Nanfeng yelled, "The situation is dangerous, don't run about." However, that youngster said, everybody, don't listen to them. They won't dare to touch us. We're all good people. Would they really dare to kill us? Everyone, get up, get up, get up. Oh my God. This youngster actually realized that the three of them wouldn't seriously hold down their waist and give them a beating. Thus he began to become absolutely unrestrained. Seeing this, Nanfang's knuckles began to crack, and he seemed like he was trying to restrain himself. However, as a martial god under Nanyang Palace Hall, he really couldn't beat up an ordinary person just because he wanted to. If a supervising heavenly official found out about it and reported him, then the aftermath really wouldn't be fun to deal with. The youngster laughed mischievously before sneering. Don't think I can't tell what you guys are trying to do. You just want to deceive us and make us stay put so you guys could solve the case all by yourself and collect the reward. I mean, yes, they are there to collect the reward, not necessarily the reward he's thinking of, since they're of the heavenly realm persuasion. Then within the Mingguang temple came another loud scream. These are all dead people. The youngster was also greatly shocked as he asked, all dead? All dead? What evil rituals? What evil rituals? Some of these brides died decades ago, so how could their skin have not rotten yet? However, it didn't take long for the youngster to get over his surprise. It's fine if they're dead. Let's carry the corpse of the dead brides down the mountain. After all, how could the people from their families not buy them back? He is the worst. You want to carry 17 dead corpses? Oh my gosh, there's gotta be an easier way to make money, my guy. When he heard that, Xiang's gaze gradually sank, and after the group of people thought it over, they began thinking that this was reasonable. Some people sighed, some people muttered under their breaths, and some people became more cheerful. Xiang stood near the doorway of the temple and said, "It's better if everybody comes out first." For many years a breeze hadn't passed through this temple, and thus the dead chi had settled in. If ordinary people breathed in, it won't be good for them. His words made a lot of sense, and everyone didn't know whether or not they should listen to him. Then little Ying spoke up quietly. "Everyone, stop being like this. It's this dangerous here. Won't it be better if we listen to this young lord? Come outside and sit down." However, this crowd of people didn't even listen to Xiang and his team, so how could they listen to her? Nobody paid any attention to her at all. But little Ying wasn't discouraged and repeated her words a few more times. Ignoring her, the youngster began instructing the crowd. "Everyone, we must choose the freshest corpse. If the corpse is too old, who knows if their family members are still living on this world? This way we won't have to waste our strength carrying the corpse down the mountain." Unexpectedly, there were actually people who praised the youngster for being smart and efficient. When he heard that, Xiang didn't know whether he should cry or laugh. Then Xiang saw someone start moving and immediately warned, "Don't take off their veils. Those veils can block the dead chi and yang chi. The yang chi in your bodies is too strong. If the corpse absorbs it, I can't guarantee that nothing would happen." Oh my gosh. This is everything is just become even more stressful. However, because this group of people wanted to pick out the freshest corpse, Jesus Christ, they had already taken off almost all of the veils. Xiang exchanged a glance with Nanfang, who had just walked over to the doorway, before shaking his head. He knew that he wouldn't be able to stop this crowd of people. After all, it wasn't like he could give them a beating until they vomited blood and couldn't move anymore. If they did that and something happened later, wouldn't their wounds prevent the crowd of people from trying to run away? Xiang truly felt quite helpless. At this moment, a buff guy removed one of the bride's veils and exclaimed, "The fuck? this young lady's really beautiful enough to the point she could ascend to the heavens. Everyone began gathering around him as people started discussing her. She probably hadn't even crossed her husband's door yet, right? Dying like this really is too unfortunate. Her clothes are a bit worn out, but this girl is truly the most beautiful. The bride had probably just died recently. Because the skin on her face was still quite flexible, someone provocatively asked, "Does anyone dare to touch her face?" The youngster immediately replied, "Why wouldn't we dare to?" The moment he finished saying that, he pinched that corpse's face twice. The youngster only felt that the skin beneath his hands felt smooth, like tofu, making people's hearts feel itchy. He even wanted to grope this girl a few more times. Xiang really couldn't continue watching this scene anymore and was just about to go over there to stop the youngster. However, little Ying had already rushed over and said, "Don't be like this." The youngster easily gave her a push and said, "Don't hinder us big men from doing things." However, little Ying crawled up again and said, "Doing something like this? You guys are truly just courting wrath from the heavens." This time the youngster became angry. "Fuck, you ugly person. Not only are you ugly, but you're bothersome as well." While he cursed her out, the youngster started kicking at her as well. Xiang reached over to grab the back of little Ying's collar and lightly lifted her away from him. Who would have thought that after he had done that, he suddenly heard a bam noise before the youngster yelled, "Who hit me?" Xiang turned around to take a look. That youngster's head was unexpectedly badly bruised, and it even had a big hole. A stone covered in blood fell onto the ground. Little Ying blankly stared at it for a moment before she hastily said, I'm sorry. I was scared and accidentally threw it." However, even if little Ying rushed to admit her wrongs, nobody would believe her. This was because the direction the rock had come from was completely incorrect. That stone had been thrown into the window that was behind the youngster. Thus, the moment that youngster had yelped in pain, everyone had looked over in that direction. They had just been in time to see the shadow of a person's figure flit past the window. The youngster yelled in a strange manner. It was him. It's that ugly creature with the bandages wrapped around his face. Let's see how much longer 9 is. Wow. How is that possible? I think 9 might be longer than 8. Xiang stuffed little Ying into Nanfang's hands before taking 2 steps over there, then gently supporting himself by placing his right hand onto the window frame. He flipped out of the room and began chasing the creature into the forest. A few braver people who wanted to get the reward also followed him and jumped out of the window. However, when he reached the edge of the forest, Xiang suddenly smelled the reeking odor of blood. Being extremely vigilant, he sensed something was wrong and immediately halted his steps. Don't go in. Xiang had already spoken up to warn them, but those people thought to themselves that it was great he wasn't chasing after it, because now they could. Their steps didn't stop, and instead they charged right into the forest. The rest of the crowd that had been originally in the temple began rushing out as well. When they saw Xiang standing at the edge of the forest, those that weren't too brave began gathering around him to watch. It didn't take too long before they began hearing a few blurred curdling screams. A few black shadows began stumbling out of the forest. They were exactly the people who had taken the lead in charging into the woods. Staggering out, these black shadows swayed around until they reached the spot where the moonlight shined down and illuminated them. And the moment everyone saw their appearances clearly, They were immediately terror-stricken by the sight. When these people walked into the forest, they were still humans. So why was it when they walked out, they became people drenched in blood? From their faces to their clothes, these people were all covered with bloodstains. It looked as if blood was gushing out of their bodies. If a regular person had bled this much, then it was impossible for them to continue living. However, step by step, these people were still walking over to them. Everyone became so scared, they began uniformly scrambling backwards until they were hiding behind Xiang. Xiang raised his hand and said, "Be calm. The blood isn't theirs." Sure enough, those people said, "That's right. The blood isn't ours. It's... Even though their faces were covered in blood, it still wasn't able to conceal their completely frightened looks. Following their gazes, the rest of the crowd shifted their eyes over to the forest. It was quite dark, so it was hard to tell exactly what was going on in the woods. Xiang grabbed the torch, then went a few steps forward as he held the torch up to illuminate the forest. Within the woods, something dripped onto his torch, making a sizzling sound. Xiang glanced at his torch before shifting his gaze upwards. After contemplating for a moment, he lifted his hand and threw his torch. Even though the torch only illuminated the sky for a short moment, everyone still clearly saw what was on top of the trees. More than 40 corpses of men were swaying in the air, hung upside down at various heights on the trees. Xiang didn't know how long the fresh blood had flowed for, but it still hadn't dried. Ugh. Drip drop, drip drop. This created the frightening scene of a forest filled with corpses as blood rained down from above. The crowd of people outside were all strong and buff men. However, when would they have ever seen a gruesome sight like this? They were all frightened so badly they completely blanked out, as not a single voice could be heard. And when Nanfang and Fuyao walked over and saw this sight, both their gazes became focused. After a moment, Nanfang said, "Green ghost." Fuyao replied, "Indeed, this is his favorite trick." Nanfang told Xiang, "Don't go over. If it's really him, then this is going to become a bit troublesome." Xiang turned around to ask, "Who are you guys talking about?" Nanfang responded, "A near devastation." See, they did this different in the Donghua. In the Donghua, like, he finds this all out in the God Cloud. But here, it's like Nanfang and Fuyao telling him on Earth. Confused, Xiang asked, "What's a near devastation?" "Something approaching the devastation rank?" Fuyao replied, "Not bad. Near devastation, green ghost. He's precisely a wraith that had been assessed by Lingguan Palace Hall, and he claimed that his realm was actually close to the devastation rank. He's extremely fond of stringing corpses on trees and making a forest of corpses. This kind of game. It could even be said that it's part of his famous reputation." When he heard Fuyao's explanation, Xiang thought in his heart, this name was truly unnecessary. If it was a devastation, then it was a devastation. If it wasn't, then it wasn't. Just like how there were only the phrases ascended and haven't ascended yet. There were no such things as near ascending or approach ascending. On the contrary, adding on a near word made people feel awkward. Suddenly, Xiang recalled how that teenager who had robbed his sedan had held his hand and led him here. Back then, there really had been a moment where that sound of rain hit the umbrella that the teenager had opened. Could it be that the reason the teenager opened the umbrella was because he had wanted to block him from being drenched by this rain of blood? Xiang quietly let out a noise. The two small martial gods beside him immediately asked, "What's wrong?" Xiang gave a brief explanation of how he had met a teenager on the sedan and how that teenager had brought him here. When he finished, Fu Yao said skeptically, "When we came up, I had sensed that befuddling array. It had been extremely treacherous. However, you said that guy just destroyed it without any extra trouble." In his heart, Xiang thought, it wasn't without any extra trouble. That guy had just casually stepped onto it. He didn't care about it at all. However, Xiang said, "That's right." "Thus, do you guys think that this near devastation green ghost is him?" Nanfeng thought for a moment before he replied, "I haven't seen the green ghost before, so it's hard for me to say. Did the teenager have any special characteristics?" Xiang said, "Silver butterflies." Just now, when Nanfeng and Fu Yao saw the forest corpse, their expressions could have been considered as completely calm. However, the moment he said that, Xiang clearly saw the expressions on their faces immediately change. Fu Yao asked in an incredulous tone, "What did you say? Silver butterflies? What kind of silver butterflies?" Xiang sensed that he had probably said something quite important. He replied, "They were silver, but they also looked as if they were made out of crystal. They were not alive, although they did look extremely beautiful." Then he saw Nanfeng and Fu Yao exchange glances. Both of their complexions became extremely ugly, paling until they were deathly white. After a while, Fu Yao spoke up in a deep voice, "Let's leave. Let's immediately leave." Xiang asked, "The ghost bridegroom case hasn't been solved yet. How can we go?" Fu Yao responded, "Solved?" Fu Yao turned around and smiled grimly. "It seems like you've truly stayed in the mortal realm for too long. This ghost bridegroom is no more than a wraith, and even if the green ghost was responsible for this forest of corpse, he is just a near devastation and would only give us a headache." After pausing again, Fu Yao's tone unexpectedly became quite stern. "However, do you know who the master of those silver butterflies is?" Xiang replied, "I don't know." Xiang explained, "The owner of those silver butterflies didn't reveal any malice, and if he had been hiding his evil intentions and is truly as scary as you make him out to be, then I'm afraid it'll be hard for us to escape him when we're within the Mount Yujin range. At this time, it's best if someone stays back and guards this place. That's why it's better if you return first and see if you can help me by sending over a rescue squad." A rescue squad for you, that's cute. He could tell that Fu Yao didn't want to stay here and deal with all of these. Oh, he's letting him abandon him. Oh, he does know there's no rescue squad. Oh man, that sucks. He could tell that Fu Yao didn't want to stay here and deal with all of these troublesome things. Since he didn't want to stay, Xiang definitely wouldn't force him to reluctantly stay here. Fu Yao was precisely a straightforward kind of person. Without another word, he brushed his sleeves and actually left. Xiang turned toward Nanfeng. He was about to speak up and thoroughly question the small martial god about that teenager, however. The crowd of people was suddenly in an uproar. Someone exclaimed, "Caught it! We caught it!" Xiang said, "What did you catch?" Two bloody figures began walking out of the forest. One was a strong and buff man. He had been one of the people who had taken the lead in rushing into the forest. Surprisingly, he hadn't been scared into retreating. Because of the forest corpse rain of blood, he could truly be considered as someone daring and fearless. The other figure was the young boy he had been dragging out with his hand in a death grip. This young teenager had bandages wrapped around his head and face in a messy manner. Xiang still remembered what the tea sommelier from the chance encounter at the store had said. Rumors state that the ghost bridegroom is an ugly creature that lives on Mount Jun. Because he was born too ugly, no woman would like him. This is why his heart gave birth to resentment, and why he would snatch other men's brides to prevent the couple from experiencing a happy occasion. At that time, Xiang and his team had thought it was just a rumor. Unexpectedly, there really was a person like this. But him existing was just him existing. Whether or not he was the ghost bridegroom was yet another matter entirely. Xiang was just about to carefully take a look at this bandaged young teenager when suddenly little Ying rushed over and exclaimed, "You guys are wrong. This isn't the ghost bridegroom. He isn't." The youngster retorted, "He got caught red-handed at the scene and you still say he isn't?" "Oh, I kept asking why you were so weird, always continuously going, it's not. Turns out you were colluding with the ghost bridegroom." Little Ying was startled by his accusation and began repeatedly waving her hands. No, I'm not involved and he isn't either. He really hasn't done anything before. He's just an ordinary what? An ordinary ugly creature? He carelessly grabbed the top of that bandaged teenager's head twice. Then let us take a peek at what this ordinary ghost bridegroom looks like to be so fond of robbing other men of their wives. His two movements caused some of the boy's bandages to loosen. That induced the young teenager into hugging his head before screaming. His voice was brimming with fear, sounding extremely mournful, yet extremely pitiful as well. Xiang grabbed the youngster's elbow and said, "Enough." Hearing the boy's miserable screams, little Ying's tears immediately began rolling down her face. However, when she saw Xiang step in, she looked as if she saw her light of hope. Immediately she clutched his sleeve and begged, Young Lord, help me. Help him." Xiang glanced at her. Little Ying immediately let go of his sleeve in an embarrassed manner. She looked as if she was afraid he would dislike her because she had touched him and wouldn't help her anymore. Xiang comforted her, though. "It's all right." Then he took another look at that bandaged teenager covered in blood. Suddenly he noticed that the boy was looking at him with a pair of bloodshot eyes. In fact, he had been peeking at him through the gap between the bandages hanging from his arms. The teenager had only stolen a single glance before he immediately bowed his head again to redo his bandages. Although he hadn't exposed his face, the little skin that had been revealed was already extremely frightening. It looked as if his skin had been burned by a fierce fire. It wasn't hard to imagine what kind of horrific face he would have under his bandages. It made other people suck in a breath of cold air, and that reaction made the younger teenager shrink in on himself even more. Xiang noticed. Unexpectedly, both little Yang and this teenager cowered in the same manner, as if they hadn't seen light all year round and if they hadn't dared to meet people either. "What do you want to do? The ghost bridegroom was caught by us," said the youngster behind him. Xiang let him go and explained, "I'm afraid it wouldn't be that simple for you guys to capture the ghost bridegroom. Just now my friend had searched for him in the vicinity and didn't find him. This boy only came afterwards. The real ghost bridegroom should still be hiding somewhere here." Little Ying summoned her courage and said, "You want the reward, but you can't randomly grab people and claim they're guilty." When the youngster heard that, he once again wanted to make a move. Ever since this case began, this guy kept causing trouble for Xiang. At the end of his patience, Xiang waved his hand. The silk Rui abruptly shot out and slapped the youngster, causing him to take a tumble. And it seemed that Nanfang had also reached his limit, for he swiftly gave the youngster another kick. Finally, the youngster hit the ground and didn't get up again. That youngster was a specialist in stirring up trouble. Once he stopped moving, the crowd didn't know who they should follow. Thus they became rather well behaved. In fact, even after a few sparse shouts, they couldn't create a disturbance. They was like a weird human demon. In his heart, Xiang thought, "I can finally begin handling affairs." After sizing up the young teenager on the ground for a moment, Xiang asked, "Were you the person who threw that stone into the window?" Although his voice sounded gentle, the teenager still shook like a bamboo sleeve. He once again took a secret peek at Xiang. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. He only saw how the youngster looked as if he was going to hit me, so he wanted to help me. Xiang questioned the teenager again. "Those corpses hanging in the trees, do you know what's going on there?" "I don't know what's going on, but I definitely know the corpses weren't hung up by him." "Do you know who the green ghost Xiang is?" When he heard that name, Xiang became slightly startled. On the other hand, that teenager looked obviously at a loss. He hadn't reacted at all toward that name, and he also didn't dare to reply to Nan Feng. Little Ying said, "He's just scared and doesn't dare to speak." "Young lady Little Ying, what's the matter with this child? Whatever you know, let me hear about it first." She wrung her hands together and said, "He really hasn't done any misdeeds. This child only lives on Mount Yuzhen. When he becomes too hungry, he'll go down the mountain and steal some food to eat. Once he happened to end up in my house. I saw that he didn't really know how to speak and that furthermore, there were wounds on his face, so I found some cloth bandages to wrap up his face. And sometimes I would send him some food to eat." Originally, Xiang thought that these two were perhaps a couple. However, it seemed as if Little Ying's protection for this teenager was more like an older sister's protection for her younger brother. So much that she resembled a senior who took care of her senior. She resembled a senior who took care of her juniors. Little Ying continued to speak. Afterwards, there were a lot of people who began believing that he was the ghost bridegroom. I couldn't do anything about it and could only hope that someone would catch that genuine evildoer. I thought that since young lord and your companions are this powerful, even if you disguise yourself as a bride to catch that ghost bridegroom, in the very least you definitely won't catch the wrong person. This is because he absolutely wouldn't go and rob your marriage sedan. However, who would have known that after I left, I heard that the youngster and his team intended to go up and search the mountain as well. I was truly worried, so I secretly followed them up to take a look. She stepped in front of the teenager to protect him, as if she was afraid that someone was going to hit him. Then she began defending the teenager once again. He truly isn't the ghost bridegroom. Look at him. Only a few people were able to beat him up into this state. How could he have been able to beat all those military officials who would accompany the bride sedan? Young lady Little Yang, have you always been living around the Mount Yuzhen area? That's right, I've always been living here, so I can guarantee that he has never done any bad things. In that response, Xiang said, "No, I wanted to ask you another question. In the Mount Yuzhen area, other than that temple here, has any other Mingguan temples been built?" Little Yang stared blankly for a second. After thinking it over, she continued to speak. "Yes, they should have been built." Xiang asked, "And why is it under the mountain? Only Nanyang temples were built, and not Mingguan temples." Little Yang scratched her head before answering. "It has indeed been built before. However, I've heard that whenever they make the decisions to build a Mingguang temple, the temple would always catch fire for no reason before it was completed. Someone then said that they were afraid General Mingguang had a reason for being unable to safeguard this place. Thus, they chose to build a Nanyang temple instead." Nan Feng noticed that Xiang's gaze had become focused. He asked, "What's wrong?" Xiang suddenly realized that everything was too simple. The brides that couldn't smile, the temple that caught fire for no reason, the Mingguang temple locked up by the befuddling array, General Pei's impressive-looking godly statue, and the ghost bridegroom who had disappeared after it was hit by the silk Yi. It was too simple. However, something had been continuously blocking his line of sight. making Xiang unaware of the simple fact from the very start. He suddenly grabbed onto Nanfeng and exclaimed, "Let me some spiritual energy." Being grabbed like this, Nanfeng stared blankly for a moment before he hastily slapped his palm against Xiang's hand. He once again asked, "What's going on?" Xiang dragged him across as he began running. "I'll explain later. For now, think of a way to subdue the corpses of those 18 brides." "Are you confused?" Nanfeng asked. "There are only 17 brides unless we add you to make 18. Xiang replied, No. Before there had only been 17 corpses, but now there's 18. Within the corpse of those 18 brides, there's one that's fake. The ghost bridegroom has mixed itself in." Okay, here we are for the final chapter. Chapter 10 of Heaven Official's Blessings, the Mountains Locked Ancient Chapter. Ancient Temple. Okay, the two of them rushed back to the Mingguan Temple. However, the main hall was now completely empty. The only thing that remained in the place of the brides from before was a hideous mess of red veils. Upon seeing this, Xiang thought in his heart, "This is bad. So bad. They're gonna die. Totally die." He began picking up the veils on the ground. The moment he finished, he heard a wave of alarmed cries outside the temple. Nanfeng and Xiang took a look outside the window, only to see a dozen or so women dressed in scarlet wedding clothes encircling the villagers. Right now, they were slowly approaching them. Each of these women's faces were deathly pale and were decorated with a smile. Their hands were stretched out in front of them, perpendicularly to their bodies. These were precisely the corpse of those brides in the temple. Jesus Christ's words. None of the villagers could remain calm as they helplessly watched the brides close in on them. Nobody had time to deal with that bandaged teenager anymore, and immediately broke into a run. Little Ying promptly went over to support the teenager as Xiang helplessly said, "Don't run." Who knew how many times he's already said that phrase tonight? Every time something happened, Xiang would have to say it at least 30 to 40 times. However, there would always be people who turned their deaf ears to his warnings. He felt truly quite helpless. Xiang waved his hand and the silk reed began flying out toward the sky. After casually making a hand sign, the silk reed began whirling around in the air by itself. It looked as if it was a heavenly woman randomly dancing about, a sight that was extremely eye-catching. And when that group of brides saw that there was something lively spinning around in a cheerful manner, something whose tail would whip at them from time to time, many of those brides were lured over to the silk reed. However, there were 7 more brides that were attracted to the heavy scent of blood within the depths of the forest. They were currently slowly hopping over there. Xiang immediately said, "Nanfeng, catch up to them. Don't let them go down the mountain." There was no need to say any more because Nanfeng had already begun chasing after them. On the other hand, 2 brides began attacking Xiang. Their 10 fingers were scarlet red and their fingernails were extremely sharp as they reached over. In response, Xiang took out 2 veils he had just picked up from the ground before he suddenly threw them. The veils flew out as they spun in the air before neatly covering the heads of the 2 brides. Immediately, their actions became sluggish. Sure enough, the moment they were covered with the veils, their noses and eyes were blocked by a thick layer of cloth. The brides became no longer able to see the shadows of the people or smell the scent of the living. And because their bodies were stiff corpse, it was impossible for them to bend their arms and take off those veils by themselves. They could only stretch out their hands and randomly claw frantically in all directions, as if they were playing a game of hide and seek. This scene was truly frightening, yet comical at the same time. Xiang stood in front of the 2 brides and waved his hands in front of their covered faces in a probing manner. When he saw how they were completely unaware of his presence, and instead began stretching their hands out in the opposite direction. Xiang began to think. After a moment, he finally couldn't hold back and said, "Excuse me for this." Xiang grabbed a hand from each bride before placing them on each other's necks. The two brides suddenly touched something and were very surprised. Since they couldn't see anything, they began to fiercely destroy each other. Xiang quickly ran away before he raised another hand. The silkery followed him in a flash of faint rainbow light before it silently fell into the ground, creating a huge white loop. Xiang yelled at the villagers, who were still running about in all directions, "Everyone, go into the ring!" The group of people hesitated as they ran everywhere, but little Yang quickly supported that bandaged teenager and stood inside the circle. After thinking for a moment, little Yang ran out again and dragged inside the little youngster who had fainted and was currently lying on the ground. Girl should have left him. At that moment, another bride had jumped over the edge of the white loop. She stretched out her hands to claw at them, but it was like she was separated from the inside of the loop by an invisible wall. Little Yang realized that the brides couldn't hop into the loop no matter what they did and hastily cried, "Everyone, quickly come in. They can't enter the white loop." Upon seeing this, all the villagers promptly began rushing over like a swarm of bees. It was fortunate Xiang made the silk reed become a few times longer than its original length, so that the loop could be sufficiently large. Otherwise, he would have to worry over whether or not people would be squeezed out. Squeeze them fuckers out. The brides couldn't jump into the loop, and they knew they wouldn't be able to touch anything inside. Simultaneously turning around, they smiled sharply at Xiang and began rushing over to him. However, Xiang had long been waiting for them, taking out a whole lot of veils from inside his sleeves. 4 or 5 pieces of red cloth began spinning around his palms. His feet moved unceasingly and his hands didn't rest. The moment a bride charged at him, he would accurately cover her with a veil. After a bride's head was covered, she would begin groping around in a blind and sluggish manner. Those veils that spun around in the sky really dazzled people's eyes. Xiang tossed and flung the red cloths in a skillful and easy manner, with those veils flying out in the air like red shadows. The people in the white loop actually couldn't stop themselves from loudly cheering and applauding at this scene. Great, amazing, truly too amazing. This skill has been practiced before, right? When Xiang heard this, he habitually blurted out, "Not bad, not bad. Those who have money, please tip me. Those who don't, please watch and support me with your enthusiasm." Only after he said those words did he realize something was wrong. The words he used to say to his audience after a performance actually slipped out of his mouth. Thus, Xiang's words quickly came to a halt. While he was speaking, a few more brides began hopping up. Every jump of theirs were at least 7 chi tall and carried them 3 zhang far. In a flash, they arrived in front of Xiang with a puff of rotten stink. Xiang bounced off his feet and also propelled himself into the sky. In the air, he quickly mouthed the password to the spirit communication array 3 times before saying, "Lingguan, the all-knowing, I have a question. Do you know if the martial god of the North, General Mingguan, has a close female friend?" Lingguan echoed beside his ear, "Your Highness, what are you asking this for?" Xiang replied, "Right now my situation is a bit critical, to tell the truth. There's currently around 10 or so dead people chasing after me." Lingguan, "That's terrible." "It's not that bad," Xiang said. "In any case, does he have any? I know this question is fairly personal and hard to answer, so I didn't within the spirit communication array. However, it's required for my mission and I definitely wouldn't divulge the information." Lingguan replied, "Your Highness, you've misunderstood. It isn't that the question is hard to answer. No, it's because Old Pei has too many female confidants. When you asked me that question so suddenly for a while, I didn't know which one you were asking about." When he heard that, Xiang nearly twisted his right ankle. All right, then within General Pei's close female friends, is there someone that is highly possessive, extremely prone to jealousy, and has a disability somewhere on her body? And Gwen said, when you say it like that, I actually thought of someone. Xiang once again sent out 2 red veils, attracting another wave of cheers. Turning around, he cupped his hands in a salute and said, please explain. Ling Gwen replied, before old Pei ascended, he had been a general. On the battlefield, he met a female general from an enemy country. She was extremely beautiful and alluring, and her temperament was heroic and fierce. Her name was Xuanji. Xiang echoed, Xuanji? Ling Gwen continued speaking. General Pei, this person, whenever he meets a beautiful woman, even if she is holding a knife to his throat, he would still seek her company. The woman led troops and crossed swords with him, but in the end, she was defeated. Xuanji became captive and was sent to an enemy camp. Taking advantage of how her escorts were unprepared, she planned to commit suicide on the spot. However, her suicidal attempt hadn't been successful. The general had chopped her long sword in half with a single strike of his own sword, saving her, and the elegant and graceful enemy General Pei later ascended and became General Mingguan. This General Pei, on one hand, was someone who always had tender protective feelings for the fairer sex, and secondly, the outcome of the war had already been determined. Even if the 2 countries continued to squabble back and forth, it was impossible for the enemy country to make a comeback. Thus, he released Xuanji. Well, over a period of time, a certain situation would gradually emerge. And what happened afterwards was extremely easy to imagine. At this time, a bride grabbed Xiang's right leg. Her 5 fingers tightened until they nearly dug into his. That sounds like a beautiful and admirable story, Ling Gwen said. It originally was a beautiful story. After all, however, what went wrong was that Xuanji became adamant in becoming General Pei's only lover for the rest of their lives. In 2 steps, Xiang leapt and climbed onto the roof as he looked down upon the 5 or 6 brides that continued approaching him. He wiped away some sweat and said, in the first place, it isn't wrong for a man to wish her lover would only love her for the rest of their lives. Ling Gwen responded, it indeed isn't wrong. However, the 2 countries were in a state of war. On the battlefield, everybody was ruthless. Originally, Xuanji and General Pei came to an agreement of having a short-lived relationship. They were completely willing to only have the present, with no following morning, where they would talk romance and not chat about war. Moreover, for old Pei, if I speak frankly, if he doesn't lead you on with another woman, it's already not too bad. However, that Xuanji was a noble woman from a general family. Her personality was extremely fierce. For the things she wanted, she wouldn't let go, even if she had to kill them. Wait a moment, Xiang quickly cut Ling Gwen off. Tell me first, is Xuanji disabled or not? Where is her disability? It's her. When Ling Wen said those words, her voice suddenly came to an abrupt halt. It was truly too annoying. Every time Xiang was about to hear the crucial point, the little spiritual energy he had borrowed got completely used up. Next time, it seemed that he had to ask his informant to say the main point first. In the middle of a leap, Xiang quickly tidied up his thoughts once again. If the bandit teenager was not the ghost bridegroom, and if every villager had already confirmed with each other that the ghost bridegroom hadn't mixed into their group, then the only remaining place it could hide was within the pile of brides. When he had hidden the group of brides themselves, the ghost bridegroom hadn't managed to notice something wrong. If he carefully thought things over after the silkweed injured the ghost bridegroom, he only saw a cloud of black mist roll into the woods. In that case, In fact, Xiang was afraid that when he had rushed out toward the forest, the ghost bridegroom stayed within the dark mist and brushed past him before returning to the temple. By hiding within the forest leaves, it sneaked itself into the group's corpse. In that case, the ghost bridegroom wasn't a bridegroom, but was instead just a bride. In fact, she was a woman wearing a bride's wedding dress. Since she was a woman, a lot of mysteries could be explained. For example, why the Mount Yijun region didn't have any of the Mingguan temples. It wasn't because the people didn't want to build one. No, it was because they couldn't build one. Little Ying had said whenever they made the decisions to build a Mingguan temple, the temple would always catch on fire for no reason before it was completed. That didn't sound very coincidental. So the only explanation for it was that someone had deliberately set those temples on fire. And why would someone set fire to the unfinished temples? Under normal circumstances, it would be because of hate. However, within Mount Yijun, there was a Mingguan temple blocked from the outside world by a befuddling array. No one could enter it, yet the workmanship of the godly statue inside was very superb. In addition, the preservation of the statue was very good as well. Why was that so? The ghost bridegroom wore a wedding dress herself, but she couldn't bear to see the smiling brides within the Mount Yijun region. Again, why was that the case? After connecting all these clues, other than the desire to monopolize someone in extreme jealousy, Xiang couldn't think of any other answers. And for that weird noise that sounded like something heavy was being dragged across the floor with a wooden stick wrapped in thick cloth, if they were truly the sounds of footsteps, Xiang could only think of one possibility. He had already covered all the brides chasing after him with a fail. Thus Xiang was finally able to fall back on the ground as he lightly released the breath. Then, concentrating his attention, Xiang got up to count the brides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10. 7 brides had hopped into the forest with Nan Feng chasing after them. 10 brides, their heads covered by veils again because of him, and they were all here. In that case, there was still one more bride who still hadn't appeared. Right at that moment, from behind him, Xiang heard the familiar and strange thumping noises again. Slowly turning around, Xiang saw a very short and small figure appear within his sight. He lightly sucked in a breath and thought in his heart, sure enough, it's like this. The short and small woman in front of him was dressed all in red. There wasn't a happy atmosphere surrounding her, and instead she only looked mournful. However, the reason she was short and small wasn't because she had a petite figure. No, it was because she was kneeling on the ground. Both her legs were broken, but her lower legs hadn't been broken off. Instead, she had been walking this entire time using her knees. In fact, the weird thumping noise Xiang had heard were precisely caused by this bride's broken legs as she hopped around and moved. And that is the end of chapter 10. Thank you, God. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, I don't know if you guys got the same feel as me as I was reading through that, but I feel like I cannot do justice to Moja and Tangshu's work, and even if I could, I do not have enough time and energy to just sit here, and I just think it's better if you guys go read the book. So this is going to be the last chapter read through. Go watch the Donghua. It's on YouTube through Bilibili. You can just enjoy it 50,000 times more better than I have. I hope you treat this as an introduction to Heaven Official's blessing, to the characters, Hua Chang, Xiang, and Fang Fuyao, the stupid gods, the stupid mortals, and go find the book. If you want the link, I'll send it to you, not a problem. You can also just Google Heaven Official's Blessings novel. Again, you will enjoy it. There's, if you're still here at chapter 10, you will like it. So go ahead and check it out. What I will continue to do is continue to review the episodes on Funimation. So there's still going to be weekly episodes. I'm behind on that too. But I think I've got 5 episodes to do and 3 to catch up on by Friday. So that's coming. You can come over to YouTube and check it out. So I'm still going to be covering Heaven's Official Blessing, but just not the novel, because there is a reason this author is as fabulous as she is, and she deserves all the praise for that. So outside of all of that, thank you guys for listening. Stay safe and wash your hands. Bye.